Good. And I am Lauren Cook, your Dean of College and Gap Year Advising. Welcome to what may be your first coffee with Miss Cook if your eldest child is starting to think about college, but also welcome back to repeat offenders. Hopefully there'll be there definitely will be some new information for you. So just a couple of housekeeping items up top. The default in my room is to have you on mute. I'm going to do some content for 15 minutes or so, so I'd ask you to stay on mute, but then the balance of the time will be for questions, and we can do that live, we can do that in the chat, whatever works best for you. So, but thank you for staying on mute for now. We are recording, and this will get sent out to the entire parent group for the class of 2027 later in the week. And then know that we do have a hard stop at 9, so we may be out of questions by then, but if not, know that you have the next 2+ years with me to keep asking questions. So we will pause then and keep the conversation going at a later date. So that's the plan. And I want to note that this is an annual event I do to start the college conversation somewhat casually before we start in earnest next year. And it's purposeful that I start with parents, family members. It's a little early for the kids. The most important thing for them is to continue being high school students, but know that they will obviously get pulled in the late summer, fall as we start their junior year. And I know that for some of you, the college admission process may be really exciting. You may be chomping at the bit to get going. It may be anxiety provoking. You may be confused. This is all quite valid. Your responses may be heightened if you didn't attend college or if you didn't attend college in the US. We certainly have a number of those families at JCHS as well. And part of that, one of the great strengths of the US college system is that it is so varied and diverse, and you have so many different options, and that makes us a real destination for folks outside the country as well. But because it is complex, complicated, and varied, that can also make it a bit of a headache. So we're going to hold both of those things to be true and know that I'm here to help guide you through this. I also want to note that not one size fits all, especially at JCHS. We always have students who are looking at the most sort of highly rejective colleges out there with those 2 to 3% admit rates. We have students that have lists that have great variety in terms of how selective they are. They may know that they're going to get into a lot of the colleges they're applying to. And we have students that are planning on a community college route that doesn't even really have an application process per se. And I love that I can guide students at all ends of the spectrum. It's one of the reasons that I work at JCHS, because it gives me some variety. But I also want to plant the seed with all of you now about the messaging that you might have received about college, or that you might be in some ways passing on to your kids, that they listen to those messages, sometimes their judgments, and take them to school and parrot them to their peers. And this can sometimes lead to a difficult climate for me around college admission. And we really pride ourselves on trying to have a culture of sanity at JCHS. So I'm going to ask you to actively support that and be working on your own feelings about college alongside, helping support your child and their peers with this as well. My goals for today are for you to get introduced to me if we haven't had a chance to interact before, give you a couple of tips to be thinking about now for your 10th graders in terms of how they can be working on some skills that will help them with this process next year and in senior year, and then to kind of preview the path and process we have in place if you aren't familiar with it. And hopefully that will take 15 minutes or so, and then we'll just do a Q&A for the balance of the hour. So hopefully that sounds good. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. All right, very good. Hopefully folks can see that. So I'm going to start with introducing myself. Oh, the slide's a little aggressive. So basically, I have been in the college admission field for around 27 years now. I worked at a liberal arts college for almost 2 decades, where I read essays and interviewed students and reviewed applications. I traveled with peers. I heard a lot of other schools talk about their college admission pitch. So I have a pretty good sense of what makes a good application across the board. And then I've been at JCHS. This is my 9th year, so I'm excited to be rounding out a decade grade next year. And I've worked on both coasts. I have an extensive network of colleagues to look to for best practices and resources. And most importantly, probably, I am not always at school because I'm either out presenting to peers or I am attending training and receiving updates on what's happening with kind of a constantly changing field at this point. I was out last week for 2 nights, for example, at UC Merced and got a really thorough introduction to that campus now that they've been open for about 20 years that I'm able to bring back to campus. So I do all these things, and it's not to sort of toot my own horn, but more to say, you're in good hands. Like, we'll be fine. And then let's move on to a little bit about the process and things that your students can be doing now. So there's a lot in the college admission process that requires students to talk to strangers, whether that's students on a college campus that are giving a tour or college admission officers that are coming to JCHS. So one thing to be thinking about with your 10th graders over the next 8 months or so is to think about if they are not someone who is comfortable having small talk with adults, with strangers, to start practicing that. And whether that's something that you're doing with guests over at your house or whether it's with neighbors at shul, we want them to be developing some confidence and some maturity in being able to practice that art of small talk with folks. We also want to have them practice drafting emails to adults. Some of your students may be doing that now. Some of them, you may be doing some of that, whether that's reaching out to a teacher, the dean at school or whatnot, someone thinking about volunteering somewhere. What we want to start doing is transitioning into having them take some of that responsibility into their hands. They're going to have to be sending me emails to schedule appointments and talk about things. And then I will help them draft emails to college representatives and whatnot. But email is very much a part of this process, managing it, doing it with correct punctuation and not treating it like a text message. So starting to get involved with them with that if you haven't already. Start a resume to track involvement. If your child has or is planning to apply for a job somewhere, they might have something sort of cursory laid out. But if they don't necessarily need to have something sort of formal. I mean, high school student resumes can be kind of funny anyway, because they don't often have much work experience. It's more about activities or involvement or whatnot, but even a list of their activities, because they are going to have to kind of regurgitate that over and over onto college applications. So if they have not been keeping track of when they started playing soccer or when they started volunteering at shul or how long they've been going to Camp Tawonga, starting to keep track of that with some rough dates, and if they've had leadership positions or the position they play on a team or whatnot, to start keeping a document of that. It is going to make things exponentially easier that summer before senior year when we start needing to format that in a professional way on college applications. So get that going. You also are going to want to start helping them think about managing their own deadlines. And I say this as if it's just a thing you can check off. This is probably like a lifelong goal for some of you as well, but we need to be helping them start to keep a planner, to be utilizing that Google Calendar that's attached to JCHS for appointments at school. And this is ultimately going to culminate in some very unmovable deadlines with college admission that is sometimes not what our students are used to at JCHS when they are able to revise and continue working on things. I find that when students get to me in the process, I become a bit of a brick wall that they hit up against where, no, there isn't flexibility to ask for an extension on your UC application. It's either in or it's not. So helping them start to think about some of that now. And of course, I do have lots of scaffolding and reminders and things in place as we're into senior year to help them with that process. But it is something good to be thinking about. And then this may seem a little bit less related, but I'm also going to recommend that in terms of that theme of independence, try and get them to find their way around somewhere unfamiliar. Some of your students may do that if they take, planes, trains, and automobiles to get to JCHS. They may have the sort of navigating something unfamiliar under their belt. But if not, if you drive them a lot of places, they tend to do things with their friends. I still very much have in my mind my senior year of high school. My mom and I went on a girls' trip to St. Louis, and we got off the plane. I was all excited for a little time with my mom, and she said, "Okay, you're going to get us to our hotel." And I was enraged because I didn't know what I was doing, how to do it. I complained the whole time looking at transit maps and all that. It's much easier now that you have an iPhone and you can literally sort of map a route for yourself. But as kids get to college campuses and need to figure out where the library is, or how to get to the bookstore and buy books, or where they might go to get a shot that they might need, it's very important that they're feeling comfortable navigating things by themselves. So it's an incredibly useful skill. They may whine about it, but you should make them do it anyway, and it will help them on down the road. Okay, now we're going to segue a little bit into what's coming with college advising. So, starting really this summer, in August, or maybe late July, all of you will be getting an email to sign up for SCORE, which is the website that we use to kind of organize the college search at JCHS. And it's how I electronically send all of their documents to colleges. And so every student needs to sign up for SCORE. And this is sort of regardless of what they're thinking their plans are at this moment, whether it is gap year, IDF, 4-year college, 2-year college. We want everybody in SCORE, so everybody's getting the same information out the gate, because students change their minds and things can vary. Parents should also have a SCORE account, so you'll get that information as well, where you can look in on your student or students if you have multiple children at JCHS. And this is where we'll keep a list of the colleges they're thinking about, where they have applied, et cetera, et cetera. All right, and then into the fall, we will start having colleges come to visit JCHS. They set up in room 120. They do half an hour sort of info sessions. Sometimes they're with slides and photos. Sometimes it's just a small group discussion. And starting in August, once your students are in SCORE, they'll be getting pings to their account about who has scheduled appointments with JCHS. If there's schools they're following, they'll get special notifications, and there'll be just a calendar in there for them to look at. And juniors and seniors can come to these appointments. You do need to RSVP in SCORE, so I know who's coming. And whether your student already has, or you have some places in mind for them, or whether you have no idea what any of this is about, I'm going to encourage that your student try to go to 4 to 5 visits at a minimum, and ideally different kinds of places. Big public research university, small liberal arts college, maybe an affinity school that, a women's college or something that's for the military, or an art school, whatever they might be interested in, just to start to see the range of what's out there. And I think that the more of these they sit in on, the more they can start developing some preferences, some priorities, some ideas of what's out there and what might be the appropriate sort of menu for them of things that they want to have on their college campus. We will then get into the winter, and that is when we have our 11th grade college kickoff. I think that this fall, it's December 3rd, perhaps. It's a Wednesday night after Thanksgiving. So you'll get plenty of reminders about that. And we will have an hour-long sort of discussion about launching this process. Everybody will get some questionnaires from me, both parents and students, to fill out. So I'm getting a sense of who you are and what might be important to you in terms of the college search, or just sort of generally for your student and you. We will have some initial meetings. I meet with students one-on-one for an hour first, and then I'm happy to have something with the whole family or with just parents together. And students leave that one-on-one meeting with me with an initial suggested college list. That's usually 15 or 20 schools to get them started. If you've already got some places in SCORE you're thinking about, I will just aim to round that out a bit. I find that generally folks have no problem finding schools on their list that are name brands and that have single-digit admit rates, and it can be a little trickier to find a well-rounded sort of balanced list of places we know are going to take you, so that we have both the balance of knowing that the student's going to college and doing some moonshots and applying to some reaches and whatnot. We will then get into the spring where there may be some standardized testing, and we'll talk more about that, I'm sure, with Q&A. They will, in their English classes at the end of 11th grade, draft their first college essay, the 650 word kind of standard common application essay, and get some feedback from me and their 11th grade English teacher. And it is a time to explore colleges. So right now, a lot of our juniors are planning trips during PASOK break and maybe for the beginning of the summer to start looking at places, or they've perhaps already utilized some of the long weekends to do a little bit of looking at what's out there. And then as we get into the summer, more college visits, students will start to narrow that list. They might throw some out, they may add some they've discovered, but we have a goal going into the beginning of senior year to have somewhere between 10 and 15 schools in SCORE that we are thinking about seriously. And on average, JCHS students apply to about 10 colleges during senior year. Okay, senior year, what happens then? At the beginning of the fall, we have an application workshop where I bring in some college reps to help folks practice their interviewing skills, read over essays, and then I will continue to have some drop-in hours, usually after school, sprinkled throughout the fall for them to work on things. I find as a group, it can be really nice peer culture for folks to both be helping each other and sitting and asking me questions. There are more college visits, and they are better in senior year, I think, for seniors because they've got a sense of what they're looking for. They're asking more pointed and strategic questions. They're also able to make some relationship with reps at schools that they might be thinking about, where that's a factor, and reps sort of clock that sort of thing. And then we're trying to finalize that list. In the winter, we're finalizing writing, we're getting applications out. Typically, the earliest deadlines are on November 1st or November 15th. So that's when the rubber really hits the road in senior year. And so October can be very busy prepping, and then we're starting to send things out the door in November and December. You also may be applying for financial aid, which we will talk plenty about over the next few years, but that is also happening November, December, January. And if your student is thinking about a gap year, we're typically doing those applications just after some of those first college applications are in. The earliest gap year applications are typically women's seminaries in Israel, and those have December deadlines. And then January through May, really other gap year programs. So it is less, sort of early and also less intense. There's a lot less paperwork involved with gap year programs if you're thinking about that. And then we make final enrollment decisions, which the seniors are just about to start doing. We've got, 7 or 8 students that are committed, mostly to places that they applied to early. But March is the month where the balance of the decisions drop. I expect we'll hear from some UCs this week, and then the dominoes will continue to fall through the journeys and whatnot. And everybody needs to pick where they are headed by May 1st. That's the kind of universal deadline. All right, so just sort of wrapping up my spiel here, and then we can get to your questions. As you're thinking about working with me over the next 2+ years, note that I've informally started talking with many of your kids or you as we were, maybe making some decisions about 11th grade curriculum. A lot of questions that come up around math and foreign language in particular. So hopefully you've gotten many of those covered. If anything's lingering, please shoot me an email, and I'm happy to weigh in. We will formally start the process in December of this year, December 3rd, and that is typically on Zoom. So it's something, again, folks don't have to commute into school, can be recorded if there's like a basketball game or something that's happening. So nobody is feeling like they're missing out on something high stakes. And then note that it is really useful. I can entertain questions via email and all of that, but to ask families in the class of 2027 to hold off on making formal appointments with me until we're in the fall and we're formally beginning the process. You will appreciate me protecting my time when your students are juniors and seniors, so that I've got room in my schedule for them. All right, so that is the end of my spieling. So much talking. Thank you for hanging in there. I would now like to know what might be on your mind. So if you've got questions for me about anything really, things you're curious about, things you've heard about, things you've got free-floating anxiety about, feel free to put it in the chat, or if you want to raise your little Zoom hand, we're happy to just take questions live. So How are we doing? What are we thinking about? Well, I can launch into the standardized test question situation for a moment, as I know that may be something you're thinking about, but may not know exactly what to ask about it. Standardized testing with the process is very much in flux. There were several colleges that were moving to being test optional. And what I'm talking about here is the ACT test or the SAT test. All colleges take both. And some students will take some will take another, some will not take any testing. More on that in a moment. So before the pandemic, we had many schools moving to being test optional for equity reasons. There's a lot of research about how testing results can be tied to family income. And then we had the pandemic, and then it became literally unsafe to have students in rooms with bad HVAC systems, breathing the same air with each other. And so almost every college in the country went test optional. So allowing students to apply without these tests, with the exception of the military service academies, so West Point, the Air Force Academy, et cetera, and the states of Florida and Georgia, because those are places where it's tied to their legislature. They make decisions about college admission standards for their public institutions, and they voted to not become test optional. So other than those very small caveats, big disruption to the testing industry and the process. We are now that we're a couple years out of that zone, seeing some changes in that sort of universal test optional world. We had a cluster of schools last year moving back to requiring testing. At the same time, we had the UCs and the CSUs doubling down on this and saying, we're actually going to be test free. No one needs to submit a test score. In fact, we don't want to see them. And I'm starting to see this year some more places either reaffirming test optional policies or moving back to test required. So as with a lot of things with college admission, I'm going to answer it depends or it varies when you ask me a question about college, because it's really diffuse at this point. And so it's going to be about your individual child, both aspirations that they might have of the types of places they want to attend, academic interests that they have. I find that more STEM focused institutions, so for example, a Caltech and MIT, those are requiring tests again. They see a lot of importance in that data point for their admission process. So STEM-ish students might be required to do testing. But on the other hand, depending on what your student's learning profile might be, for some folks, this is really not a strength. And we might want to be looking at schools that have cued that this is part of their mission and value system, that they are looking at other things in the college admission process beyond what happened at 3 hours on a Saturday morning. So I will be making some sort of testing prescriptions that are good for your child and your child alone. So what their best friend may be doing may not be right for them. But we do have everyone go through a process of taking practice tests. So your child probably took the practice SAT this past fall. They'll do that again in 11th grade. I offer a free practice ACT for them to take, and then we look at the data. And those test scores don't go anywhere but to you all, your student, and to me. They don't go to colleges. You don't need to prep for these tests. We're trying to get some raw data, and then to think about the things they're interested in, the schools they might be looking at, and then deciding, okay, we're getting on the testing train, and this is what that means and which tests they're going to go with, or we're getting off the testing train and we're going to just be looking at some test optional places. So hopefully that helps. I'm looking to see in the chat here. Yes, so many changes due to the new administration and funding for science and research. Should we take this into account or discount this as a blip and keep the long game in mind? What a great question. And I was going to say at some point, the caveat of there's lots of things changing about college admission, whether it's standardized testing, whether it's the use of AI and how that's disrupting things, whether it's the climate for Jewish students on campus. And I have some answers and thoughts about each of those things. The new administration stuff, I am as much watching it and asking questions as you are. I am sitting in on webinars. A lot of them have just sort of so far been unpacking what's happened without so much understanding or strategy about what's going to come next. But I do think At this moment, keep the long game and what has been historically precedent and provided on college campuses in mind. And I think we'll have a better sense in the next 2 to 3 months, at least, of how much of what's happening with the current administration is going to stick and how much is going to be caught up in courts and legal battles. And the needle won't be moving as far as we thought in terms of defunding some of this science research, but also research generally on college campuses. I was hearing a lot at Merced last week about, departments being affected across the board. It wasn't just NIH funding or whatnot. So stay tuned. And as I have more information, I'll obviously be pushing it out to you and your kids. Amy, you've patiently had your hand up. What do you want to know about?
I have a few questions. Hopefully I won't forget them. The
Mhm.
first one is if you're, potentially applying to 10 or 15 schools, let's say, um, through the application process, is each application individualized for that particular school in order to make them feel like you really want to go to their particular school? I mean, how much of it is regurgitated and how much of it is like really focused?
Great question. So, to give you sort of the general idea of the applications your kids are going to be working on, I find that most of our students are engaging with 3 different platforms. There's the Common Application, which has about 1,000 schools on it, a lot of the private colleges and some out-of-state publics. You have the UC application for those 9 campuses, and then you have the California State University, CSU application. On a scale of sort of most complicated to easiest, that's kind of the scale. Like the Common Application is where you're going to find, everybody does one long standard essay on the Common App, but then some schools will ask those individual questions as well, saying, well, why are you thinking about NYU? Or what is it? This is literally from Michigan's. What is it about the curriculum in the department you've chosen at Michigan that draws you to the institution? So you have to like sort of spend time on the kinesiology website and look at what it is about their curriculum. So the Common App stuff can be pretty detailed. The UCs, you're applying to however many you want to generically. So you fill out 4 shorter questions and those just go to all of those schools. It should not be, well, I want to go to UC Santa Barbara. It is just more generally about you. So one question might be about an extracurricular you're in or a challenge you faced or an academic area you want to pursue. But once you've completed those questions, that's it. You just go to all the campuses you've checked off. The CSU is the easiest. You're literally self-reporting your transcript, the end. There's no activities, there's no writing, there's no recommendations. So people can
Oh,
often whip off that application in like half an hour. So it kind of depends on what your list is made up of as to how much time and whatnot. But I will say I've got some strategies about how I want students to approach each pieces of these writings, because as you do more, you can start to recycle, right? So what you write
right.
UCs, you could pop into some of those why you want to study biology at Tulane. There's a method to my madness in terms of how I roll it out to students so that we're trying to minimize reinventing the wheel as much as possible. Other questions you had?
Well, maybe I should wait if other people have questions or so one of them was like, how do you choose which ones you're going to travel to? Because there's no way we're going to go visit 10 colleges. That's a lot. Number
Totally.
one.
Yep.
And number two, like the whole idea of like gap year versus junior college into 4 year versus, straight into 4 year. We don't know what we want to do there yet.
Yep. Yep.
So, trying to figure out what's going to be like the most rewarding thing for our kids. So I don't know if you can speak to that, and then I'll stop.
Yeah, totally. So I will say the visit question is actually really helpful for the second part of your question too. I would say if you're looking to get started and do some things, and if you have a child who's willing, some folks are sort of, I cannot comprehend thinking about this. They don't make eye contact with me at school. Like that's okay. That's also developmentally appropriate at this point. But if you've got a student that's willing and you are traveling somewhere for a family wedding or bar mitzvah, or you've got vacation this summer, and you are able to pull off and go see a college or two, I would suggest doing that, especially just in the realm of types of schools. So if you go drive out to see UC Davis, you're going to see a pretty large public research institution and just get the vibe about what that feels like, especially for students coming out of a small place like JCHS, go get on a big campus and see if they're like psyched about that energy and the anonymity and all of that, or whether it's overwhelming.
Do you just show up or do you need an appointment? I mean, can you just like walk
You
on
you
campus and go, here it is?
I mean, you can go just wander around if you would like. Most places, especially larger ones, are fine with that. Smaller ones may have the security booth or, whatnot that you need to go through. But literally, if you just Google UC Davis tours, you're going to get their visit page. A calendar will pop up and they'll be highlighted the days in which they have visits open. So it's a pretty easy clicking system at this point. Most colleges have like a morning and an afternoon visit session, and they're often max 2 hours. You have an info session for maybe half an hour with the admission staff where you get some overview, and then you're out on the campus tour for an hour. So I would think about booking an appointment because it's going to be more informative and give you sort of the broad scope of things. It's a student giving the tour, so they're going to, prattle on about all of their favorite places on campus and, foods to eat and all the rest. And just doing one or two of those every few months right now, I think can be really helpful for just giving your student a base layer idea of what they might be looking for. And then if they know they like a big public institution, you don't actually have to like go to Oregon or go to Michigan or whatnot in the moment of the application process. If they know that that vibe generally is working for them, you can then save some of those more one-off expensive visits for if they know they got in, right? So I think you can have some more local places, at least do some stand-ins for a small liberal arts college or a private medium-sized school. I think Santa Clara is a great place to visit for that kind of 6,000 or 7,000 suburban kind of school. They don't have to want to go to Santa Clara, although we do find students like Santa Clara. It's got nice energy to it. It's a pretty campus, to still get something from that visit, right? About the types of things. So yeah, you don't need to try and knock off 10 visits before we actually are in application season. And then to your question about sort of pathways post-graduation, this is one thing we're going to be talking about, thinking about, chewing on. The community college route can be the most cost efficient, and I will say we have one of the best community college systems in the country. You can hardly, throw a rock without hitting a really great community college in your community. And there is a guaranteed transfer pathway to the UCs, to 5 UCs, from all the community colleges in California. So if you take a certain set of gen ed classes, you have like a 3.0 or above GPA, and you say like, my goal is UC Santa Barbara, you hit those metrics, you apply to UC Santa Barbara, you're going to UC Santa Barbara. And then there's preference given for those not the 5 campuses, and it is the sort of more selective ones you'd think of: Cal, UCLA, I think Irvine, and maybe San Diego. You still get preference in their applicant pool because there is a state mandate of the number of transfers a UC has to take each year, and a mandate about how many are coming from community college, because it ends after 2 years, right? So if people are trying to transfer in from a CSU or a private college, they're sort of second in line for transferring because they could stay at their current institution and get a degree there. So I'm a big fan of going the community college route. I will say some of the drawbacks are, you're not always in a residential situation, although there are some that have a residential component. That's part of why it's cost effective. But for a student, who would benefit from having that community environment socially, as well as academically, to feel like they're in a community of learners, that can be something you want to parse out. And then you also want to think about your student and the classroom climate that they're in, because literally the whole world is in community college classrooms. There's a different peer culture. Some folks are very driven in our TAG program, thinking, and all that transfer admission guarantee program. But some are adult learners, some are doing trade stuff, some may have, flamed out in high school and they're trying to sort of redo things, but their motivation level might be different. So you have to account for the fact and think about how your student learns best. Are they enough of a self-advocate that they can stay focused? Or is that environment potentially in some cases going to be a distraction? So those are things to weigh. I will also say, in terms of gap year, whether a student, a family is thinking about a gap year or not, go through the motions at JCHS as a student, in the applying for college process until you feel like there's a reason not to. Most colleges our students are looking at allow for a year deferral, so they can have their spot saved for them. They go do their gap year and then come back and enroll on a college campus. In some rare cases, a student, especially if they go to Israel, and I will say students do gap years everywhere, but 90% of our students each year are going to Israel. Sometimes they decide to reapply to college. They might think that the place that they initially have the spot saved for them now isn't going to meet their needs Jewishly, as they've had, some discovery and independence in that year. Sometimes, very rare instances, but they might decide to make Aliyah and just stay in Israel, which happens as well. But most come back and will continue on to that college. But I think while you are at JCHS, you have access to me. We've got your teachers to write those recommendations, for me to help you do the application. If you end up doing it again at some point, you've had the experience, right? So, and it's rare that there's a college that says a hard no on gap years, although I will say the CSU system is one of those. So if you get into Cal Poly, which has gotten, much more competitive, you then have a decision to make about, am I going to Cal Poly, or am I going to go take my gap year and apply again? In just about every other scenario, we can try to find something that will work. I think I got both of those. I'm now going to check the chat box because I think there was a question there. Second application round as a parent, but first at JCHS. Excellent. First time caller. Do families also work with private counselors, or do you find this creates conflict or issues? We found it mostly helpful for keeping our kid on task with essay writing and deadlines. Not sure if this is something you help with as well, so unnecessary. Thanks. Excellent question. In the college advising handbook, which I have on the college advising website, I'm going to encourage you, if you have not looked at my 30-page document, that's fine, but it's also meant to be, there's an index in the front. So if you just want to read 2 pages on campus visits, or just want to read the 1 page on independent counselors, it is there for you. But I will say the independent college counselor field sort of cropped up out of a need. There was a big moment, especially in California, where guidance counselors were being, and college counselors were being defunded at public high schools. And so to fill that gap, cropped up a lot of independent college counselors. Most of those funds have been replaced. And I will say this is often more of a perceived need than an actual need, especially in more moneyed communities. There's a thought that, well, we throw money at a lot of different things, so this is another place where we should bring some help in. For most JCHS students, what your tuition dollars are paying for is enough. That I am here to do a lot of one-on-one appointments. I am reminding them, I am harassing them. Most of them sit outside my office during every free moment they have, especially senior year, to just holler questions into me. So adding a second person into the mix can sometimes, yes, muddy the waters if we have conflicting advice. I will also say independent college counselors run the gamut. I have some that are my very best friends and who are incredibly ethical and have been in high schools or college environments. And there are some who saw their child through the process and said, well, now I'm a college expert and I'm going to hang a shingle and charge $500 an hour. So if you are interested in having an independent college counselor, and I will say, for some students that have executive functioning issues, who have maybe dysgraphia, writing is hard for them, for folks that have some piece of a learning profile that might make extra support and scaffolding useful, this is a conversation we should have. The learning support folks at JCHS, especially Dr. Neufeld and Mr. Cohen that work with juniors and seniors, are also there to help them with these deadlines and writing essays. But there are some times where it's an appropriate choice to bring in someone to help with some of those things. But the balance of our students do not need that extra noise in their ear about what they should be doing, because I do sometimes see I'm privy to essays where the independent college counselor has commented on it. And sometimes I've seen things where it's sort of outright encouraging the student to make something up so that it sounds more compelling or more pulling on the heartstrings or whatnot. And I take an ethical approach to this process and want students to be getting in on their own merits as themselves. So, but if you have particular questions for your family and where you might be weighing this, let me know, because I'm certainly happy to help work with someone that's outside of the school as well when necessary. And this does also come up with folks thinking about the service academies. So we've got one or two folks right now looking at the Air Force Academy, and that does require fitness tests and getting a recommendation letter from legislators and whatnot. So there is actually an independent counselor I recommend our students work with in tandem with me to meet some of those extra requirements that I don't have the same expertise in. So that's an example of where it would be useful. Other questions? It's 8:41. We've covered a range of things. Angela, yes.
Um, what if, maybe you said this already. I'm so sorry, I'm at work. I had to step out for a minute. So please forgive me if you've already mentioned this, but what's your sense of when some of the kids that feel a little later the game about thinking about colleges come through? And I mean, some of the people on this call we've known for a long time, but it's very hard to picture our child like being ready to move away and live on his own, and then 18 months back from that to be focusing on this process. And I'm just wondering if especially for those kids that have later birthdays who aren't even 16 yet, like if we can feel confident that some amount of independence and motivation around this process will blossom in grade 11.
Yep. Great question. I will say that I see remarkable shifts both between this point and this point in 11th grade, partially just due to peer culture, right? Because you do find that your class starts to get into a wave of thinking about what's coming after JCHS, and whether that is going and just sitting passively in a college visit in the fall and hearing a little bit about it, whether that is locking into the curriculum in junior year as they might have a little step up in rigor and whatnot, and having a different set of faculty members that are pushing them in different ways. And there is just also like the brainstem growth and and all of that can happen over the next 12 months. But I do think that summer before senior year is a moment, and note that I work 12 months of the year. I do take vacation, but I am, having appointments and reading, writing, and doing all of that during the summer, because especially for, the rising seniors, that's critical time to start working on applications. That summer before senior year, I think, is a moment where we start having some hard conversations about, okay, are we really making a list of four-year colleges? And that's a thing we're going to be thinking about. Or are we looking at perhaps a transition gap year program? There are programs that do work just on study skills, executive functioning, living independently, that some folks may think about doing. There are summer programs, like a place, Landmark College in Vermont. We had a couple of kids do that, not this past summer, but 2 summers ago. Landmark College is a college literally for folks that have complex learning profiles. And whether or not a student feels like they actually want to enroll at a school like that for 4 years, or just access some of their resources. They do great multi-week programs during the summer where students take some academic courses, but they're also doing intensive study skills, executive functioning work, independent living. That can be a great test the water to see whether we want to really pull the trigger on thinking about the full 4-year experience, or whether living at home for a year or two with community college. We've got one or two JCHS alumni from last year's class doing that now and applying, doing some 4-year college applications now, and I'm helping with some of that. Again, I also help alumni. So whether that's, transferring from the college they're at, whether it's we've got a little bit of a longer runway and they're going to take a year or two after graduation before applying, or whether they're getting out of the IDF and applying for the first time, I'm still available for whether that's Zoom meetings or reading, writing, or whatnot. But I do think there's something about that summer between junior and senior year where we've got a better sense of the direction we're headed in. And it's never too late to change course, right? It doesn't hurt to submit a college application and then decide, well, you're not going to go, So I'm a big fan of keeping all the doors open until we feel like it's important to start shutting them. So I hope that to some degree. But I will say, just for the folks that are also more generally like, my child either feels immature or spaced out or just not quite there yet, a lot of things are going to happen over the next year and a half just from this being in the water at school. So it's not even necessarily something you will have to do or I will have to do to get them kickstarted on it. But doing some of those casual walkthroughs of a college campus, or, bringing it up here and there can be helpful. Does that help, Angela?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, great.
Lauren, do you mind if I pipe in real quick?
Yeah, jump in.
Sorry, I have my camera off, but just to answer Angela's thing, I have a senior who's going through this right now who I swore was like gonna live at home forever and not someone I thought was gonna just jump off and want to go and do all these college applications and get excited. He was always kind of late to getting things done, this and that. I can't tell you the change I've seen just in the last year that I totally didn't expect, because kind of what you described was my kid. Like, I wasn't really sure I was like, he's gonna live in my basement forever and be go to college and run, maybe go to class, maybe not. He's completely flipped around, and it wasn't anything I did or threatened. And I don't know if it's just the environment at the school, like Lauren was saying, or what, but there's something that happens with their brain at a certain point where they're like, oh, I have to get my crap together. And he just totally motivated. He got his, I think he was one of the first ones to finish his applications, which was like
He sure was.
shocking. He couldn't wait to ring the bell. I think he was like second. I don't know. But he did it over the summer. I didn't even ask him to. Like, it was wild. Like, I just kind of sat back and watched. I didn't see his essays until after they were done and after they were submitted. Like, everything got taken care of at the school. Lauren did a great job with everything. The school really helps kind of push them through, and it keeps us out of it, which I think helps as well, because if we're giving them pressure, they get mad, right? So I was very surprised by how smooth this went. And my husband just walked through here a few minutes ago and was like, oh, I know someone who writes essays. Like, why don't you talk with them? I was like, we don't need to. We've got Lauren. Like, I was like, that's like not necessary. So, and he's gotten into 7 schools so far. And we're still waiting to hear. We hasn't gotten any rejections yet. We're still waiting to hear on the other. And this isn't like a brag thing. This is more just a, like, I'm so impressed with how well and smoothly this went. I was really worried about him with the college process, and it's been absolutely like, well, easy from my end because I don't have to do anything, but it's been great to see him grow and see him succeed and do well with this whole process. And the school's been fantastic, and Lauren is just awesome to work with. So just wanted to share that recent experience that we're going through right now.
Thank you, Sarah. And I will say, you mentioned ringing the bell. I do also try and gamify some things. I've now been doing this long enough that I've found ways to try and get students excited about silly stuff. So I do have some of the best chocolate at school in my office. So it makes a lot of them come in every day. They can hit a gong in my office when they have submitted all their applications, and I keep a running tally of how many gong hits. Some people read it as something else, but gong hits have been on my bulletin board. So folks like to, compete with each other to get stuff done. And I also will have a raffle at the end of this year, and people put tickets in for when they get admitted somewhere and when they get denied somewhere, and they get prizes for both. So, trying to keep this light and in perspective. So, yeah. Okay, we got a couple more questions in the chat. For students with learning differences, are there colleges that keep offering learning support? Absolutely. And in the College Advising Handbook, again, you can just flip to that page. I've got a little bit of learning support overall advice, and then a couple of schools that really show up on all the lists of places that offer some of the finest support. The gold standard, the Cadillac is, but not that expensive, is the SALT Center at the University of Arizona. Not everybody wants to go to Arizona, and the University of Arizona itself is gigantic, but their SALT Center there really just is phenomenal. And if any of you know Michael Shapiro, who runs the dining program at JCHS, his daughter, Talia, graduated from U of A maybe a year, 2 years ago, and she did work with the SALT Center and can talk more about it, raves about it. But most colleges have something, and there is just kind of a sliding scale of how helpful, in depth, et cetera. So I'm happy to give some advice on that, but there is a starter list of some schools to check out. in the handbook. And then what is the extent of the support you're able to provide students with their essays? Excellent question. Yes, as Sarah noted, I do quite a bit, but I also have help. So at the end of junior year, as I mentioned, all 11th grade English classes have a section on the personal narrative, and their assignment is to literally write a draft of a 650-word Common App essay. There are 7 different prompts on the Common App, including write up your own question and write about it. So it's very broad. And this is a moment where whether it's Ms. Foth or Dr. J, are giving them some guidance, advice, showing examples. And then I also give feedback from the college advising perspective. And so they go into the summer before senior year with something on paper. We might scrap it. We often scrap it, but it has helped them kind of flex the muscle of writing in the first person, which can feel really awkward. And then going into senior year, I do a lot of work, feedback, whether it's just sitting down and brainstorming things with them, whether it is, looking at a paragraph and helping them figure out what direction it should go in, or giving sort of final perfectionist kind of advice and feedback. But Dr. Lessie also works extensively with me. It's part of her position now at school. So anyone who is in the AP literature class in senior year starts with her on their college writing and does some of that brainstorming and trajectory and all of that. And then I look at final pieces with those. And anyone who's in an at-level English class starts with me and does that process. But that way we've got several eyes on things, and I'm not reading essays until my eyes bleed. So I'm able to sort of come to things fresh every day. But yes, we are usually between us able to take care of all the writing support. But again, if you also have a learning support person at school, Mr. Cohen has been working with seniors this past year and helping those folks in his caseload with their writing. And Dr. Neufeld can do some of that at the end of 11th grade with his students as well. So there's lots of writing support. And I will tell you, I do try and keep folks from sharing their essay with everyone, because it can start to, I have this great graphic, but I don't have it right now, where it's like a pizza that has like M&Ms on a quarter and like a rotisserie chicken on part of it. And then like your essay can start to look like that, where it's like this Frankenstein situation if 8 people have given you feedback. And we don't want to get to that point, but there are lots of other folks at school. Miss Matz loves to read essays and give feedback on them, especially seeing the arc of your child from 9th grade to 12th grade. And Dr. Resnikoff has read essays. Rabbi Brick has read essays, especially folks looking at JTS Columbia or writing from a particularly Jewish perspective. So they have lots of supports when it's appropriate to access those as well. So. Oh my gosh, I've done so much talking. Are there other questions, or are you sick of me? Got 7 minutes left. Okay, another message. In your opinion, if your kid transfers to another high school at the start of 11th grade, will that have any adverse effects on college admission? Great questions. We have folks transferring out. We have folks transferring in. I will generally say, on the face of it, a transfer isn't necessarily a bad thing either way. We love you to stay at JCHS, but we want students to be in the place that works best for them. And so I think the biggest piece on their college applications is articulating the why. And in some cases, it can actually be quite powerful and helpful for the student if they are able to sort of name the things they were looking for and how they took the energy and the time to make a change for something that would be better for them. So kids that transfer into JCHS, I do work with them on that paragraph. And there is, for most applications, if you say you've transferred and given old high school, a box pops up asking you to say why, or is there anything they should know about that transfer. So you never want to drag the former school. You want to focus on what was the goal that you needed to get to, that was the new school that may be the better place for you. But I think it can be quite positive. The drawback is that curriculum matchup. And, it's what I always get nervous about when we have someone come into JCHS sophomore year, junior year in particular, where you've already got a step up in rigor. Are those curriculums going to match up? Are they going to be able to hit the ground running and swim? Or is there going to now be another transition issue like they might have had in 9th grade? and is that going to show up on the transcript? So whenever we have new transfer students, I sort of watch clenched throughout the fall of junior year until we get some grade reports to see, okay, they're doing okay, this is going to be fine. Everything is going to look good for the college application. So the thing to think about is that curriculum matchup, and knowing that junior year is often the last time you've got a full year of grades for your applications. So it is a pretty, I don't want to say high stakes because I don't want to stress you all out, but it is, sort of the last word on how they're doing in a full year before you submit those applications. So those are just some things to think about with transfers. Anything else? All right. Well, this has been delightful. Do not barf all of this up on your kids when they come home today from school. Don't stress them out. Just take some time to sit with this and work out your own feelings about, thinking about college for the child you're in the room for. And know that we'll do another Zoom like this that your kids are actually invited to as well in August, usually right before school starts, just to kind of let's get some early questions out of the way before I dive into the seniors for an intense couple of weeks. But again, be on the lookout for that score email this summer. And if questions come up between now and then, please drop me an email. I'm happy to answer what I can. And yeah, I hope you have a great week and enjoy some child-free time as they're on their journeys later this month. So, all right. Have a good one, everyone.